The book is The Diversity Delusion. We're talking with Heather McDonald, senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute. She's also the author of The War on Cops. Many of our listeners will remember that book as well. And I should point out that this book, just like your others, meticulously researched. Virtually on every page, there's a specific reference to a specific study. So it's not like you're transmitting your opinion here. This is very well documented. And you break up the book into 4 sections. The first 2 deal with the diversity delusion with respect to race and then gender. And so we've talked about those in passing a little bit now. Let's dig in a little bit more specifically on gender. And there's, of course, the statistic out there, and you clearly disagree with it in the book, that 20% of all women have been sexually assaulted on campus. You dig into some of these reports suggesting that 69, I think it was at Harvard, 69 or 65% who said they had been violated, didn't think it was serious enough to report. And you say if they had actually been assaulted, they would know it. So what can we actually define as the facts on something like that?
Well, the fact is certainly not what the feminists tell us. What we know for a fact is that there's a drunken hookup culture that is the product of sexual liberation, that says that there's no differences between the male and female libido, that there should be no traditional constraints on the male libido, such as chivalry or respect, that females should not be exercise modesty and prudence. They should be as sexually aggressive as males. And this is resulting in a hookup culture of one-night stands with partners whom you barely know. And that's sexual liberation said that would be great for males and females. Turns out it's great for males because they have a natural biological inclination to have sex with as many females as possible. Females respond differently to sex. They feel more emotional connection, and they're less prepared to just sort of walk away from an encounter. So they often feel regret. Sometimes they are trying to cover up infidelity to a boyfriend, but they will translate that, and they're encouraged to translate regret into rape accusations. If we were living through what these numbers, if the numbers put forward by the campus rape industrial complex were correct, that would signify a crime epidemic that's really never been seen anywhere, not in the worst African civil wars, certainly not in Detroit. And if that were the case, if there was that much sexual assault going on college campuses, you would have seen a movement to create single-sex schools decades ago. Instead, what you have is highly educated Gen X baby boomer mothers doing everything they can to get their daughters into selective colleges. You have now a majority of students on campus are females. And so either these feminists are not being strong women together and are simply staying silent and not warning these girls who we're to believe were like lambs to slaughter going into this tsunami of sexual violence, or it's not going on. And when I look at the numbers, again, the numbers of female applicants to college, the frenzy to get into college, the fact that there are practically no actual rape reports to the police, I conclude that this is one big hoax.
And Heather, in this book, you talk about how sometimes relationships go bad, the guy starts dating someone else, and then after weeks or months or perhaps longer of consensual sex, all of a sudden it gets reported because they're no longer happy with the relationship status and so forth, which leads me into the issue of Betsy DeVos, the education secretary, and her demanding more due process in terms of how colleges handle this and not just relying on an accusation. What do you think of what she's done on this front, and is it enough?
Well, it's important, and certainly the abuses of the Obama administration were many, and many have written about this eloquently. I mean, it really was a travesty, the types of campus judicial proceedings that evolved that ignored all that we know about how to be reliable truth finders. So she's definitely on the right track when it comes to campus rape tribunals. I hope that she mandates that there's such rights as cross-examination and no double jeopardy. But to be honest, I've taken a slightly different tack on this question than most of my fellow conservative critics of academia, who have focused really exclusively on this due process problem and have punted on the issue of whether there's an underlying reality there. I think that we need to take on the fact that there, in practically all instances, with there's always going to be exceptions of really truly egregious assaultive male behavior. But what to me is more interesting is just to notice how weird the campus sex scene is, because it began in the 1960s with students demanding that adults get out of the bedroom, and what was called the in loco parentis rule for college administrators to serve in the place of parents to try and monitor students' behavior, protect them, keep them, behaving morally. That was all thrown out as old-fashioned and patriarchal. And so students were left to have as much sex as they wanted and navigate it. And as I say, girls didn't get as much benefit from that maximally promiscuous regime as males. And now the totally bizarre thing about this that few people have just grasped is the students are now asking adults to write highly technical rules for sex. This is just bizarre. Sex is the realm of the irrational, the primal urges, the inarticulate. It can't be regulated like a mortgage contract, and yet that's what these feminists are asking college bureaucrats to do. The next step is going to be to demand a lawyer or a diversity dean to be present for every drunken coupling, every procreative act that goes on. So what I see happening is sexual liberation having a nervous breakdown. Nobody's willing yet to completely say we need to return to modesty and chivalry. They insist on the rights of maximal promiscuity. Nevertheless, they are covertly re-importing certain Victorian values, like making males the exclusive guardians of female well-being.
Heather, a few more questions in our remaining time here. Obviously, a lot of this is focused on what's happening on campus, but as you explained with the Google situation, it's happening in our culture as well, and some would say it's been happening this week in Washington. Here is Hawaii Senator Mazie Hirono just a couple of days ago talking about what she thinks the role of men is in this Brett Kavanaugh-Christine Ford controversy.
I expect the men in this country and the men in this committee, and many of them, believe me, because we all signed on to this letter to demand an FBI investigation, but really, guess who's perpetuating all of these kinds of actions? It's the men in this country, and I just want to say to the men in this country, just shut up and step up. Do the right thing for a change.
Do you see that flowing from the mindset that we see on campuses, or is this more unique to the situation at hand on Capitol Hill?
Oh, it's a direct conveyor belt, Greg. You're absolutely right. I mean, we're just seeing a mirror image from the notions that the so-called survivors must always be believed, the claims that have been made that she shouldn't have to testify, that would just be too traumatic. I've heard somebody on The View say, well, the males on the Senate Judiciary Committee are not protecting women. Whoa, that I thought that's what we're supposed to not have anymore. But again, we are re-importing covertly aspects of the Victorian ethos, because it turns out that it actually, the notion that the male libido needs restraint through norms of respect and chivalry was a much more honest acknowledgement of the differences between males and females than what we've got now. And so slowly but surely, and with nobody actually being explicit about it, we're putting it back on, of course, but we do put males at double jeopardy all the time. We want them to be protectors, and yet we're still going to hold them responsible. We want females to have the rights of promiscuity, and yet they get to claim fainting victimhood at a turn of a hat. So there's a war on men in this country. I mean, that's the bottom line. If you're a white male, from here on out, good luck getting hired or promoted. You're going to have to be twice as good as everybody else, because the obsession with diversity, the push to hire by race and gender is now accelerating in every mainstream institution in the country, and it all comes out of the academy.
How do you define diversity versus how they define diversity? Some just say, well, the strength of America is diversity, and leave it at that. From a more traditional perspective, yes, we love diversity because you can be an American, because you can come from anywhere, but you agree with the ideals that America was founded upon by personal responsibility and rule of law and pursuing your dreams. We have freedom of opportunity and all the basic freedoms of speech and religion and association and so forth. But it doesn't seem like that's necessarily what the others mean by that.
No, they definitely don't. They have no interest in American ideals. Diversity for them is skin deep. It's what's between your legs. It's things that I think are trivial that are now being used to destroy the extraordinary legacy of Western civilization, the literature, music, art, architecture, philosophy. Diversity is not an idea that I've thought about per se apart from in the academic context. So I don't think it's necessarily a good or a bad thing. To me, it's sort of an irrelevant way of organizing the world. And frankly, there's empirical data that the more diverse a local community, the less social trust there is. So I think we have a lot of myths around this. There's frankly, homogeneity may be a bad thing. It may also be a good thing. I just don't think these are ends in themselves. What really matters is, are we selecting the best possible people? If it turns out that a scientific lab is all female and those females are the best possible researchers of Alzheimer's, that's great. Who cares? But who cares? I really don't care. But if it turns out that the best possible researchers to cure Alzheimer's disease are males, whether they're white males or Asian males, I also don't care either. I just don't think diversity is a particularly interesting concept.
Last question. It's maybe not even a question. I'm just going to quote from early on in your book here. You say, "We are cultivating students who lack all understanding of the principles of the American founding. The mark of any civilization is its commitment to reason and discourse. The great accomplishment of the European Enlightenment was to require all forms of authority to justify themselves through rational argument rather than through coercion or an unadorned appeal to tradition. The resort to brute force in the face of disagreement is particularly disturbing in a university which should provide a model of civil discourse." So I guess the last question is there a path back to the way it should be?
Yes, every one of us has to rebut the victim narrative. As long as the central claim about America is that it is endemically and inevitably, invariably racist and sexist, the demands to shut down free speech are going to continue. It is up to all of us to say we have, for however egregious our historical sins, we have made enormous progress. We are an open and tolerant society. Most Americans just want to get along. They don't care about race. You know, they do see people on the quality of their character. It is the left that is wanting to pigeonhole everybody by divisive identity politics. So we have to stand up against this accusation of ubiquitous racism and sexism.
Heather, it's a vitally important topic, and you have an excellent book here that I encourage everyone to pick up a copy of. It's The Diversity Delusion, How Race and Gender Pandering Corrupt the University and Undermine Our Culture. Heather, thanks very much for your time today.
Thank you for having me on, Greg. I appreciate it.
I'm Greg Columbus reporting for Radio America.